So, it's weird that we don't talk more about Shermie Pines, right? Gravity Falls as a series has so many themes of family and loss. I mean, one of the biggest plot points in the show is that one of the main characters is missing his long-lost twin brother. So it's interesting that in the fandom for a show about siblings and missing your siblings and getting along with your siblings and losing contact with those siblings, we don't talk more about Shermie, the third Pines brother. I mean, I know he's not one of the boys, but he's canonically one of the boys, so it's interesting that I don't see him come up as much in fandom discussion. What we're going to be doing today is talking about Shermie Pines, pointing out every reference to him that I can find in the series, and talking about what those references say about him, and what we as a fandom can extrapolate from that. So I wanted to clarify, this is going to be one of those videos where first we look at all of the instances and all of the information that we have on Shermie in the mainline series, and then we're going to begin doing some Gravity Falls theorizing, as in overthinking, looking at every possible angle, that type of thing. And I find that kind of stuff really fun, but it's not for everyone. So if you don't like overthinking about children's cartoons, this might not be the one for you. Sorry, y'all. The first and most obvious reference to Shermie is A Tale of Two Stans, in which Stan says,
"They're your family, Poindexter. Shermie's grandkids."
I have a niece and nephew?
So this dialogue doesn't do much outside of indicating that neither Stan nor Ford are the grandpa to Dipper and Mabel. Which doesn't matter to most of us, but it mattered a lot to people who really thought that he was their grandpa. R.I.P. Grunkle for Grandpa peeps. We might have a second reference to Shermie in this episode, but we'll get back to that. The second reference to Shermie I can bring up is actually in Journal 3, in which Ford says this.
Apparently, Shermie Pines' grandkids have been staying with Stanley for the summer. It's hard to believe the parents would trust these kids with Stanley. They clearly thought he was me.
This doesn't really add much more about Shermie, except for the fact that his name is Sherman. Before this, we really didn't know if Shermie was a grandpa or a grandma. I mean, Shermie can be read as a feminine name, but this confirms his name was Sherman. We also have a reference to Shermie in the 2015 3DS video game Gravity Falls: Legend of the Gnome Gemulets. In an actually pretty cute exchange at the end of the game when Stan recounts being in the hospital when Dipper and Mabel were born, he mentions Shermie again. He specifically says that he didn't want to let go of them and that he had to fight Grandpa Shermie just to hold them for another minute. And then he says this about Grandpa Shermie. That guy was a total square, and he wore a bow tie to the hospital. And then he goes on to say this one time, which indicates that he has more stories about Grandpa Shermie being a square. So he's at least somewhat familiar with Shermie. Though I will say the reference to Shermie being both a square and having a bow tie, it gives me tad strange conspiracy flashbacks. But, yeah, that's it. That's everything we know about Shermie. Alright, thanks for joining me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and... Oh yeah, I guess we gotta talk about the baby, huh?
You're always going on about your damn baby.
Ugh. The scourge of my timeline and the timeline of so many Gravity Falls fans. And of Grunkle for Grandpa theorists. Again, my condolences. So, I've talked more in depth about this baby before in my timeline video, which, as flawed as it is, I'm still very proud of it. I mean, even though I've come across like a half a dozen mistakes since publishing, I still think it's more or less as correct as it's gonna get, so I recommend you watch that sometime. Thanks. But to recap, we don't know who this baby is, but we do know who this baby is supposed to be. As of recording, Alex Hirsch has never straight up answered the question of who that baby is, but it's supposed to be Shermie. Yes, and even the most generous interpretation of the timeline, that would mean that both Shermie and his kid would need to be between 13 and 15 years old when they had a kid for Dipper and Mabel to be born by the 1999-2000 timeframe. But that's not because the baby isn't Shermie, in my humble opinion. It's because the writing team messed up the math. I mean, like, as I stated in my timeline video, the scene when Stan is getting kicked out of his parents' house, aka the scene where Shermie shows up, or this nondescript baby shows up, that scene is taking place I estimate around 1969, but really any time between 1969 and 1973. Which means it's smack dab in the middle of the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War provides the most convenient explanation for where Shermie might be if this isn't his kid. But Alex didn't say that Shermie was in the war and that this was his kid. Alex Hirsch said,
"The Tale of Two Stands? Was that baby Shermie Pines?"
I cannot talk about the baby. Baby's off limits. Next question.
The only other time that Alex was asked about the baby was at Big Fest in 2016. What did Alex say? It's currently a secret. The last thing worth mentioning is a Twitter exchange with Gravity Falls writer Jeffrey Rowe, in which he was asked who the baby was, and he just said, "That's Shermie." And I would say that that's a, pretty easy open-close case, but shortly afterwards, a few hours later, he said that he didn't actually know. He wasn't sure. It isn't canon. And I'm not sure what to make of this. I mean, he is a writer. He is familiar with the show, so I feel like he would know who the character on the screen is, but he also wasn't a writer in A Tale of Two Stands. That being said, the first tweet is still up. The second tweet is long gone. What even happened here? Did Jeff realize that he wasn't actually sure? Did someone message Jeff and go, "Hey, what are you talking about? That's not Shermie"? Maybe they just didn't want anyone to look closely and do the math. Who knows? If you ask me, Shermie is definitely the baby. Not just for that, but also because when Stan is mentioning who he lived with in Pines Ponds growing up, he mentions his ma and pa, but he doesn't mention an older brother of any kind.
I lived with my ma and pa in the lead paint district of the family pawn shop.
I mean, that would be weird, right? If he had an older brother, a brother who was old enough to have a kid by the time Stan and Ford are in high school, and just didn't mention him at all, right? I just think the show creators didn't keep track of his age. Hell, sometimes they forgot that a third son even existed.
You have two sons.
So that leaves us with two options. Option one is that Shermie is this baby. Option two is that Shermie is at the war, or working, or just out of the house, or other options that we'll discuss, and that Ma Pines, Karen Pines, is watching his baby. But the thing is that both of these have some really interesting implications. So let's talk about them one at a time. So if Shermie is this baby, then that means that Stanley Pines never got to know his brother, or at least not until that brother was already an adult, which is a heartbreaking thing that should be in every fanfiction. It would mean that this baby has no memory of growing up with Stan Pines, and that he would only hear about Stan from photos on the wall, or hearing secondhand about him from Ford, or Karen, or Philbrick Pines. And by the way, we have no way of knowing if Ford would even want to talk about Stan, or if it would be just too painful to discuss. I mean, it's possible that Ford isn't close to his family after Stan leaves, which would mean that Shermie, if he's this baby, would have lost out on getting to know both of his brothers. I mean, maybe Stan is only talked about in hushed tones by visiting relatives like, "You know, you used to have a brother, right? We don't talk about him anymore." You know, how my family probably talks about me. And this is crazy depressing, right? Like, this means that Stan was on the road, grieving his lost bond with his twin, and also grieving any chance he got to get to know his baby brother. Because as far as we can tell, he never went back home to New Jersey. And this baby obviously doesn't have the ability to just go up and find him. And obviously he did eventually get to know Shermie. Like, Stan was there when Dipper and Mabel were born in the hospital. And he even apparently has stories about his brother being a total square. So they obviously reconnected at some point, but we have no way of knowing if Stan reconnected with Sherm as soon as Shermie was old enough to move out of Pines Ponds, or if it was only well after Stan took over Ford's identity. And I don't know what's worse. Stan only reuniting with Shermie when Shermie is 18 after Stan had already been living on the streets, only for Stan to need to eventually fake his own death, causing Shermie to lose his brother all over again? Or Stan only getting to know his little brother while pretending to be another man altogether. So let's look at the second option, if Shermie is in fact an older brother and this is his kid. If Shermie isn't this baby and instead is at the war or something, what could that possibly mean? Well, focusing on the Vietnam War theory, it would mean that he'd be coming back after deployment to Vietnam to a household with one fewer sibling, which is probably a crazy thing to go through. It would mean that Shermie possibly tracked down Stan after he came back from Vietnam, possibly a whole year later. And the wartime theory has implications even beyond Stan and Ford's relationship to Shermie. It would mean that the Pines household was one of many that had the trauma of the Vietnam War around it like a stink. They'd be watching news about massacres in Vietnam, watching news about shell-shocked soldiers, and about soldiers that wouldn't come back, all while having a brother in Vietnam. I know that the Vietnam War comes up an inordinate amount of times in my videos, especially about a series that doesn't mention it once, but like, the boys were about to turn 18, and if my timeline is right, then they were just a few months out from that from being drafted. Of course Stan would have wanted to get on a boat and sail away, and of course Ford would have wanted to go to college. And what does that even mean about Shermie? What would it mean for him to come back? When he and Stan eventually reconnect, is he a different person than the kid that he was before he went to Vietnam? Is that what makes him into such a square? He has PTSD, Stanley. It might not even be the war. Maybe he was at work. Maybe he went grocery shopping. Maybe he went out for a pizza and he came back and everyone was crying and Stan was gone and it's like the Community meme. But I'll also say that if Shermie is the older brother and not this baby, then that changes what Stan is going through after he gets kicked out. Like, he's not just missing a baby, he's missing a full-fledged person who he has memories with growing up in that household. Is that worse? I don't know. And it makes me wonder what kind of memories he might even have with the Stan twins. Did the Stan twins have somebody else protecting them growing up? Because in the flashbacks, it looks like they only had each other, but maybe that's just because it wasn't important to their journey, or they couldn't fit it into A Tale of Two Stans, an already very tight episode. It would be weird for Shermie to be an older brother, though. After all, remember what the principal said?
You have 2 sons.
Though I guess Shermie could be trans and just wasn't out yet. I mean, Shermie Pines was a popular interpretation of Shermie. I think by Sariel on AO3, I have to check. And the Shermie headcanon was canon compliant before the journals and the video game confirmed that this was a guy, a grandfather named Sherman. But as far as I'm concerned, that could just mean that he transitioned later in his life. Who's to say? Like, the principal was like, you have 2 sons, and Shermie was like, oh yeah? Bet. That's right, it's trans all the way to the top, baby. The wild card option here is that Shermie wasn't in their lives at all. Like, maybe he was kicked out before Stan and Ford even turned 17. Philbrick seems to have no qualms about tossing Stanley out on the streets. Maybe this kid is the neighbor's kid and Ma Pines is babysitting. Who knows? There's also this elephant in the room of the Lost Legends joke. So for people who didn't see the comics, there is a like conspiracy board that Schmebulok is looking at. It says something like time travel paradox or whatever, implying that the reason why the age makes no sense is because some kind of time travel shenanigans. And I don't take this seriously. I think it's just a bit poking fun at the fact that they messed up the math. I mean, it's right next to the page with the Journal 4 on Schmebulok's shelf. Did you guys see that Journal 4 on Schmebulok's shelf? Like, I'm tired, Alex. I'm still working on the rectangles. You can't throw new shit at me. That Journal 4 didn't even excite me. When I saw it, I think it just made me mad. Like, really, Alex? I was 3 days away from retirement and you bring out Journal 4? I don't have time for this bullshit. Yeah, it's only canon-ish or whatever, but this isn't a game, Alex. Do I look like I'm having fun? I can't handle any more secrets. There's too many as is. That's really all there is to say about Shermie, unless Alex Hirsch has more answers. The reason I wanted to make this video is because I think that Shermie Pines is a super underutilized character in fan spaces. I mean, there are some great interpretations and uses of this character, but I want more. We don't know if Shermie is alive in 2013 or the summer that the show takes place. After all, Stan uses the past tense when he's talking about Shermie being in the hospital with him. But hopefully this video gave you fanfiction ideas, or at least stuff to think about when making theories for Gravity Falls. Thank you for joining me for Project 618, a series of Gravity Falls videos being released this week, the week of 618, the Gravity Falls number. I'll see you next time, and until then, this is Hannah signing off.